Okay.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. I'm sorry about the delay and the technical difficulties. Let me welcome you to the Prague Center for Middle East Relations webinar. Today's topic is the present and the future of Islamism. We have two very distinguished guests. Firstly, Professor Gilles Kepel, who is a French political scientist and Arabist who specializes in the contemporary Middle East and Muslims in the West. Mr. Kepel is professor at Paris Sciences and Letter University, as well as chair of the Middle East and Mediterranean program at École Normale Supérieure, and the director of the Middle Eastern Mediterranean Free Thinking Platform at the Università della Svizzera Italiana in Lugano. He's also author of many books. Some of them also were published in Czech language here. Most recently, his books were translated into English: Terror in France, The Rise of Jihad in the West in 2017. And the very, very latest one from the 2020 is Chaos, Away from Chaos, the Middle East and the Challenge to the West, which was reviewed by the New York Times as an excellent primer for anyone wanting to get up to speed on the region, which I have to concur. I have just finished it a couple of days, reading it a couple of days back. And the book will also be translated into Czech language once again, so you may stumble upon it in bookshops in some time. Our second guest is Dr. Marek Čejka. He focuses on the Middle East, the relation between religion and politics, international law, religious radicalism, and terrorism. Currently, he's an associate professor and lecturer at the Mendel University in Brno at the Department of Territorial Studies. In 2001 and 2002, he was fellow at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And in 2013 and 2014, he was a Fulbright fellow at Harvard Seminary in the US. He also published many books in the region, including Judaism and Politics, Israel and Palestine, Encyclopedia of the Middle Eastern Terrorism, Rabbis of Our Time, and most recently in 2020, Quran, Sword and Ballots, Sources and Forms of Islamism, which people from Czech Republic, members of our Czech audience, may already know from bookshops as Quran, Meč a volební urna. What we are going to cover today with our distinguished guests, the state of Islamism in the region in the light of recent developments. What's new in the post-Arab Spring Middle East and North Africa and the post-ISIS period, and what should we expect in the future, and what is going to be security and political implications of these developments for European countries specifically. Also, Marek is going to give us an assessment of the impact of varying Islamism discourses in Francophone and English language debates on the Czech discussions on radical Islam and Islamism, to sort of give it a spin, for the Czech conditions. So without further ado, I would like to ask Professor Kepel. Thank you very much for agreeing to participate. I would like to ask you to give your opening statement. Thank you.
Děkuji and dobrý den. I should maybe introduce myself in the Czech Republic not as Gilles Kepel, but as Jili Kepel, because as some of you may know, my father and my grandfather were both Czechs. My grandfather Rudolf was one of the forgotten founders of the Czechoslovak Republic. He was marginalized by Beneš, with whom he did not get along. And he was the first translator of Apollinaire in Czech and others, a man of letters. And my father did went the other way around. He translated Czech literature into French, and particularly good soldier Schweik, which was a very successful play, which was in the French theaters for some time, and this is how we made some money actually. So I'm very glad to be back, even if it's a virtual or a digital link. I would rather have been in the place I usually rent in Smíchov when I go to Prague, but let's hope it will be for next time. And I'm very glad to have this discussion with you, because I was not aware that there was a group of young people. I see already 30 participants who are interested in this issue in the Czech Republic. I used to deal with people who were my age or even older, tracing back to the good old days of communism, when the Czechs, because of course of their superior intelligence, even when they become French, knew languages and did the sort of translating and the spying job for the Soviet Union, while the East Germans did assassinations and the Hungarians, whatever. So I'm very pleased to be in touch with you, and as a routine, I try to come once or twice a year to the Czech Republic, and so in the future, if we ever get out of the COVID-19 and before the Chinese launch a COVID-20 or 21, if I have the possibility to be back, do not hesitate. I will be delighted to give a hand to my old country, if I may say so. So thank you very much, and dziękuję again for helping, for having me in. Sorry that my Czech is limited to Dobrý den, pivo, and vino, but with this, I can go anywhere. So in a way, unfortunately, you know, when I start writing a book, usually, I don't have to look for much in my, you know, not too much soul searching, because events unfold, and I just have to write that. I'm in the process of putting the last words to a new book, which will come out in French in early February. And it's called in French, Alliance et Rupture, Alliance and Breakaway, which is an analysis of what happened in year 2020 in the region, from the Middle East to Europe. And it has to do with the new coalitions, the new alliances that were shaped and that sort of reshuffle the cards in the region, whether what I called the alliance of the brothers and the Shias between Turkey, Qatar, and Iran on the one hand, and the sort of Abrahamian agreements or entente on the other between the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Israel, and the like. Also with a number of other subgroups, the Astana process group, bringing together Russia, Turkey, and Iran, the Med-7, the Mediterranean countries of the European Union, and a few others. Alliances which are not really fixed, but that evolve, that bring together people who are enemies between each other, bring some force of reconciliation, for instance, between Turkey and Iran, who supported opposite sides in the Syrian civil war, and so on and so forth. But as I was starting to write the final chapter that dealt with Europe in September, events unfolded with an enormous magnitude, particularly in my other country, i.e. France. And because we had 3 jihadist attacks in a row, the first one on the 25th of September, the second on the 16th of October, and finally the last on the 29th of October. And then there was closer to you the attack in Vienna on the 2nd of November, on the eve of the US presidential election, when the world was holding its breath to see whether Biden or Trump would have to bear with Biden and Trump for the next 4 years. We were kept hostage by another jihadist attack. And so I would like to focus on that because this was one of your questions, i.e., where are we in terms of jihadism? And so as you just kindly mentioned, my previous book, Away from Chaos, where I've tried to delineate the different phases of jihadism. I think to some extent we're now we're seeing a new process which is unfolding, and I would like to share with you my most recent hypotheses, which will come out in February, but we can discuss them now, and please do not consider that they are words of God or sacred texts. This is for us to debate and to discuss. So to wrap up a little, in this Away from Chaos book, which was a sort of sum total of what I had written in the last 40 years, more or less, because my first book traces back to 1984, The Prophet and Pharaoh, which dealt with the groups that assassinated Sadat in Egypt while I was living there for 3 years. At the time, no one thought it had any interest, and they wondered why I would lose time on such a topic. And so the 3 phases I tried to put in perspective in a sort of Hegelian dialectic, if you'd rather, were the following. First phase of jihadism started in Christmas Eve 1979, when the Red Army invaded Afghanistan. It was a Prague coup in Western Asia, if we may say so. The former, it was not Dubček that was ousted, but it was a branch of the Afghan Communist Party who had really fucked up. That was replaced by another one that came with the Russian tanks to Kabul. And this was as opposed to what happened in Prague, because Prague was, included in the Yalta agreements, and therefore the West would not move. Kabul was nowhere to be dealt with. And then the US and the CIA believed it was free to act. And Brzezinski, who was the national security advisor to President Carter at the time, the Pole Brzezinski, our cousin, said that, wrote to Carter, this is a golden opportunity for us because we're going to inflict a Vietnam on the Soviet Union. And this Vietnam took how should I say, the face of jihad. It was a movement that was boosted by religious ideology, by Muslim Brother, among others, ideology, paid for by Saudi Arabia and the Gulf petro monarchies, and trained and equipped by the CIA. At the time, it was called the dollar for dollar match. There would be one CIA dollar for one petro dollar. And they had 2 targets. There were 2 birds to catch with this jihadi stone. One was the Soviet Union, and the Americans would use proxies. They would not go there, or just as advisor. They would not fight. It would be no Vietnam War issue with the Vietnam War syndrome. But they used those guys with the big beards that they rechristened, if I may say so, freedom fighters. So they try to translate this thing into their own categories and political parlance that attacked the Soviets. And they provided the Stingers, ground-air missiles that downed the Russian planes. The Russians used those tanks that they should have sent throughout Europe to the Pyrenees in the mountains of Afghanistan, which go up to 8,000 meters above sea level. So it was not really working very well there. They were stuck. They couldn't get out of the trap. But there was another bird that was they wanted to kill, which was the Iranian bird, because Khomeini in 1979 had come back to Tehran from Paris and had challenged Saudi hegemony over the Muslim or Islamic political discourse, using a very strong anti-American and anti-imperialist overtones. And to some extent, this was the beginning of what we now call, and I've been one of those who coined this word, and which is of course very much discussed and not agreed with by all today, which is called in French Islamo-gauchisme or Islamo-leftism, i.e. the Iranian Revolution blended its Islamist concepts with third worldism, particularly after a book which was originally written in French by a French Caribbean doctor working in Algeria, Frantz Fanon, which in English was called The Wretched of the Earth, Les Damnés de la Terre, was translated into Farsi by Ali Shariati and a few others, and where the typical categories of Marxism, the oppressors and the oppressed, were rendered into Islamic parlance, like the oppressors were the mustakbirun, the arrogance, a Quranic term, and the oppressed was the mustadafun, the disinherited, if you want, or the weakened ones. And this is important because this is a big issue, a big debate on the field of Islamic studies between people like myself who believe that ideas are important and that you should not be an essentialist, but it's important to blend ideas and social conditions. It's not the same to be a Marxist or an Islamist, even though you may say that the movements may recruit a huge amount of people amongst disenfranchised youth or what have you, but it's not the same. And you have to take ideas seriously. You have to understand ideologies, and if possible, you have to have access to the source, i.e. if it's about Islam, you should be able to read what it means in Arabic and to see how it functions within an Islamic and Arabic Weltanschauung. As opposed to that, you have some of my colleagues, including the famous or the infamous Olivier Roy, who consider that it's no use to know any Arabic to understand what happens in the banlieues in France, and that, you had the Red Brigades in the past, then you had the Browns, and now you have the Greens. And it's only an issue of toolbox. Social movements use what is available and trendy, and it makes no essential difference. And I believe that the reason he says that is that he doesn't know a word of Arabic, of course. But this is, I believe, a major mistake, as those people were extremely influential in the West, because most decision makers do not know foreign languages or such strange languages, quote unquote strange. Therefore, they feel legitimized when people who are supposed to be in the know tell them it's not a problem to be an ignorant. And this led to, I believe, a catastrophe in terms of public policies, in terms of the allocation of resources for research. We are paying a very heavy toll for that, and that's why I'm so glad that a group of young and promising Czech scholars has embarked on this difficult path. So, A, fighting against the Soviet Union, B, fighting against the Iranians to sort of recapture leadership of the hegemony on the Islamist political parlance from the hands of Khomeini, because you had in 1979 not only the return of Khomeini from Paris to Tehran, but also the hijacking of the siege of the Mecca Grand Mosque by ultra Wahhabis who challenged the Saudi dynasty domination. And you also had the hostage taking at the American embassy in Tehran. So all that, in a way, boosted the Islamist credentials of the revolutionary Iranian Shias and tremendously weakened the Saudis. And jihad in Afghanistan was also a means to boost back the Saudis to some extent. So to cut a long story short, 10 years after the work was done, on the 15th of February 1989, the Red Army had to flee Kabul only to see the Berlin Wall fall in 11/9/1989. And you know, as jihadists are keen with numerology, 11/9, of course, is the reverse of 9/11. So 11/9 is the end of the 20th century and of communism. 9/11 to them is the beginning of the new Islamist millennium. We had a debate last year, I think it's also in Czech or in English maybe, with my compatriots and colleague Jacques Rupnik, whom most of you know, on 1989 precisely, seen from Central Europe and from the Middle East, because for all Central Europeans, the very idea that their revolution, whether it be velvet or otherwise, would have been helped or even caused by Arabs or Muslims looks like anathema. It was us. It was because we threw the Russians away, no doubt, but it would never have happened hadn't it been for the Red Army being destroyed in Afghanistan. And this is something I believe which is interesting. I don't know whether I'll be that popular saying that in the Czech Republic, but I'm a French citizen, so I don't care. And so this is something that that was important. But at the time, you know, I was already 34 in 1989. I was able to read a newspaper and to read some Arabic, and even someone like me did not really pay attention to the 15th of February, because I paid attention to the day before, which was the 14th of February. It was not only because it was Valentine's Day, but it's because it was the day of the fatwa, the infamous Khomeini fatwa against Salman Rushdie, sentencing him to death because he was because of his blasphemy against the Prophet in his so-called blasphemy in his novel Satanic Verses. And mark my words, because this is still a very important issue, because we've had now 3 people killed, I mean, 4 people killed and 2 wounded in France by 3 jihadists, precisely on this issue of blasphemy. It was started by an Iranian firebrand, Khomeini, and then, like many other things, like suicide attacks, for instance, it was channeled into the Sunni Islamist words and reused under their aegis. So the Afghan jihad and the victory of the Afghan jihad, paid for by the Saudis and trade and the Qataris, who were friends at the time, and trained and equipped by the CIA, was hijacked. The carpet was pulled under their feet by the Shias. They won the media war, and this was a big trauma. And we'll have to see. I will get back on that a little later. Now, after Afghanistan was freed from the Soviets, and there was a lot of turmoil, internal turmoil, and most foreign fighters left and went back home or went to some other place like Bosnia. Now, this is where, you know, there was a little, some sort of epistemology that took place at the time. And with some other people, we coined the word jihadist, which did not exist before, in order to make the difference with the mujahideen. I mean, the two words mean exactly the same. It means jihad fighters, but we sort of use mujahideen to identify the local fighters, the Afghans, who were interested mainly in the fate of Afghanistan and were not interested in what happened elsewhere. The jihadists were the Pakistanis, the Egyptians, the Algerians, the Saudis, and what have you, and some people coming from the outskirts of Europe also, who were foreign fighters. They were sort of, if you would liken them to things that happened in the communist world, they were the sort of international brigades of jihad. And they came back home, or they tried to duplicate, to create copycats of the Afghan jihad at home. It did not work. In Algeria, they had 150,000 dead. It spilled over into France. In Egypt, they had 1/10 of this amount of dead, but nevertheless, Mubarak was not ousted. In Bosnia, the Dayton Agreement stopped the issue of re-Islamizing and militarizing the former Yugoslav Bosnians. And in Chechnya, which was not very much noticed at the time because it was part and parcel of the post-Soviet world, we were not very familiar with it. So we were not paying much attention. But in 1997, they failed. And then some people who were among those fighters, those jihadist fighters, by the name of Osama bin Laden and his mentor, his Suslov, if you'd rather, Ayman al-Zawahiri, tried to learn the lessons and said, why did we fail? We failed because the masses were afraid and did not side with the vanguard. I mean, they would not think, because they had lost the money of the Saudis and the stingers of the Americans. They would not think of that. They said, we made a mistake because we targeted the nearby enemy. And the Muslim masses are frightened because they believe the West is stronger. So we have to change focus and now focus on the faraway enemy. And this is made explicit in the manifesto of the second phase. There was one in the first phase, but we have no time to discuss that. You can see that in Away from Chaos if you're interested, by Ayman al-Zawahiri, that was put online in 1996, 97 approximately, under the title Knights with a K, under the Prophet's banner, or in the original Arabic, Fursan tahta rayat al-Nabi. And then he said, we have to refocus on the faraway enemy. We have to strike at the West so that the masses will understand that the West is weak and they will side with us and they will mobilize under our banner precisely. And B, we have to win the media war that the damn Shias have won against us. Hence, we have to do something very spectacular, bring Hollywood into the 8 o'clock news program. And this was 9/11, preceded by attacks on the American embassies in August 98 in Somalia and Kenya, the attack on the USS ship Cole in Aden, and the like in 2000. So in 2000 and the like. 9/11 was an event of incredible magnitude. It was the beginning of the 21st century, and maybe of the third Christian millennium that they thought would be an Islamic millennium. And but they also had their shortcomings. They were convinced that Afghanistan would be a new Vietnam for America, or that they would duplicate what they had inflicted on the Russians before. This was not the case because the Americans used proxies, and the Bush war on terror issue focused first and foremost on Iraq, not on Afghanistan. They sent soldiers to Afghanistan. There is now more or less evidence that they knew where bin Laden was. They were not interested in getting him because he was not the target. He was the bad guy, so that people would be convinced that the war on terror was an issue. But the big thing was Saddam Hussein, get rid of him and put in his stead the majority Shia government that would be sympathetic to the US and to Israel, punish the Saudis who had, backed bin Laden to some extent, and also with prosperous pro-American Shias in Iraq. That would mean by a contagion the end of the Iranian Islamic Shia Republic nearby. As you all know, this did not happen. Even though the war in Iraq was harsh for the American troops, and I think some Czechs were there also, we did not go, because as you know, we had a president at the time whose name rhymed with Iraq, Chirac, so we wouldn't go. And then it was very, very, they paid a heavy toll in terms of death, of casualties. And this is also very important because many people who went to Iraq came from the Rust Belt states, from the blue collars workers who had lost their jobs to China and who would have voted Democrats in the past. And they were the ones who voted for Trump in 2016, as you know. And because he was anti-war, whereas Mrs. Clinton was far more of a bellicist. And so actually, the US managed to get out of Iraq thanks to Iran, because the Iranians sent their Shia militias to break the bones of the Sunni jihadists. And that led to this very strange thing, even though America and Iran were the nemesis of each other, nevertheless, they sort of shared power. They had a sort of condominium on Iraq, with, of course, a much bigger part from Iran, but this was a very strange place where the two countries were cooperate. I was last for this book in Iraq in 2018, and I was staying at the Prime Minister's residence for guests, sorry. And the funny thing was, you know, at breakfast, you had all those Iranian experts with their beards and the women with the veils who were in line waiting for their halal sausages or what have you, and mimicked, of course, on an American breakfast. And then you had real Americans or Iraqi Americans who were coming to explain what democracy was about. And they were, you know, queuing in line, and then everybody went to do his own business. But it was a very funny metonymy, if you wish, of the situation. So anyway, at the end of this phase 2, Al-Qaeda did not really succeed. The copycat attacks in London and other places were not in Madrid were not successful, and they did not really manage to mobilize the masses. Then you had phase 3, which was ISIS or Daesh. And then you had, in my view at least, this is not shared, of course, by all of my colleagues, there were two guys who were important, two ideologues, or one more of an ideologue, the other an activist, who shared the same kunya or nickname of Abu Mus'ab, who was a companion of the Prophet. Abu Mus'ab as-Suri, the Syrian, educated in France, trained as an engineer, so we still can see educate world elites, and who lived in France, then married a Spanish woman, got a passport, which is important, a Schengen passport, which is the minimal requirement for international jihadists. Then went to London, which we call Londonistan, where among all the jihadists there. And he knew Europe. He had noticed that there were many young Muslims in Europe. Many of them were deprived, were angry, did not adhere to the liberal values of Europe. And therefore he thought that there was a very favorable field there. B, Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, from Zarqa in Jordan, who had been active in Iraq and who had developed a very strong anti-Shia line, which was not originally part and parcel of the Al-Qaeda kit, if you want, and or code. He was even chastised by Zawahiri for that. So Abu Musab al-Zarqawi managed to create this sort of Islamic state of sorts in Iraq that would later expand into Syria due to the civil war in Syria, while a number of young people from Europe would go to Syria in order to help the rebels against Bashar al-Assad. And the two forces coalesced, and slowly the rebellion against Bashar al-Assad became more and more Sunni Islamist and less secularist. And it was paid for by Gulf countries, Sunni Gulf countries, because they thought that Bashar was the sort of link between Iran and Beirut and Iraq to make this sort of Shia crescent against the region to threaten Israel and build a position of strength in terms of territory. So, to cut a long story short, you had this ISIS phenomenon that took shape out of the coalescence, if I may say so, of those the thought and practice of the two Abu Musabs, even though the two never collaborated really. Abu Musab al-Suri also published a book, a lengthy online thing, extremely difficult and boring to read, called in Arabic, Da'wa ila al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya al-Alamiyya, the global or the world Islamic resistance call. And this was his lessons learned, and said, you know, Al-Qaeda did not work out. He was Bin Laden's PR person, actually, because it was a top-down phenomenon. It was, to use old parlance, it was a Leninist thing, pyramidal. You had people at the top sending others in planes and giving them orders. It does not work. We did not reach out to the grassroots. We have to have a grassroots movement, which would be network-based and bottom up instead of top down. And this was organized mainly after he had seen what was happening in Europe and in France in particular. And when those guys went to Syria, then they developed those networks things. They would come back to France and to other countries, to Germany, and the like. And thanks to networks, thanks to the digital world, thanks to WhatsApp, Telegram, and what have you, they would coordinate between people who would make attacks from the Bataclan, of which we're going to unfortunately commemorate the 5th anniversary the day after tomorrow in Paris, 130 dead. To the Nice attack, to the Breitscheidplatz in Berlin and other places. So this was finally destroyed by the Western coalition in 2015 because the rogue caliphate of ISIS, or Daesh, as we say in French, because, you know, Arabic is becoming the language of France now. The West managed to destroy, to carpet bomb all that. The Kurds did the rest of the job. They were not really thanked much by President Trump afterwards because he had a business partnership with Mr. Erdogan's family. And so by the end of 2017, Raqqa fell, the capital of the so-called caliphate. And then by 2019, the last pocket in Bahus fell. You had huge numbers of prisoners in the Kurdish camps in the northeast of Syria. We have many hundreds in our prisons also. And like, the guys still have this jihadi mentality, but they think that the model failed. They have to do something else. Then this is where they were. And, you know, we were with my students, who one of them just wrote a book, Hugo Micheron, called Le Djihadisme Français. It's going to be translated into English soon. And he made interviews with 80 jihadi inmates in France, both from Al-Qaeda and from Daesh or ISIS. None of them is pleased with the outcome, but they still share the ideology and they want to find another way out. And this, I believe, is what we are now seeing. This is the sort of 4th generation, but there's a clear break with the previous 3, because the previous 3 were built on real life networks, people who knew each other, chains of command or networks or what have you. We have now entered into the post-virus and the largely digital world, with individuals who take action, who are not at all lone wolves because they are not isolated. They were socialized intellectually and religiously in jihadism, or in the Salafi doctrine of al-wala wal-bara'a, i.e. allegiance and breakaway, which I mentioned. And they wait for a propitious situation to take place so as to take action. And this is what I call the jihadism of atmosphere, or the atmosphere jihadism, if you want. Let me give you an example. And we had already one in France earlier on last year, when a guy who worked actually at the police headquarters in Paris in a unit which was specialized on tracking jihadists in the French capital. He was a deaf man. He was recruited on a quota for people who were deaf. He was frustrated because of that. And there is very strong Islamist and jihadist propaganda among deafs, saying that Islam will relieve them and the like. And this man had converted, he was a Caribbean, he had converted, French Caribbean, had converted to Islam, dealt with a mosque that was very radical in the outskirts of Paris. Then no one knew. And one day, he bought a couple of knives in a shop and stabbed 4 of his colleagues. So he was not a lone wolf. He was not in a network that was known. But there was this opportunity. It was the day when there was a big trial of former jihadists in the nearby courts near the prefecture of the police and the city island in the center of Paris. And then he would go to action. This was sort of bizarre at the time. We tried to understand what was happening because it did not look like the previous phases. But it was not yet that clear-cut. Now, crystal clear. Now, what the 3 attacks that we had in Paris resemble each other in a way. Why? Because there was an atmosphere that was created. You know, on the 3rd of September in Paris was gathered the big court that would, judge and sentence the attacks of January 2015 in Paris, the Charlie Hebdo attacks, 17 dead, 11 dead, sorry. Then the 2 policemen and the hyper kosher, the Jewish patrons of the shop, of the hyper kosher supermarket, the remaining of the 17 dead. And this was a big trauma for France, also with the other attack that would happen on the 13th of September in Bataclan and at the French Stadium, which was of a much bigger magnitude. And the hope was that the judicial process would sort of be a catharsis, would reconcile society with itself, would bring a language of truth and so on. But this was derailed.
Professor?
Turkey and Iran, who saw huge demonstrations in Pakistan and Bangladesh, where you have always huge demonstrations in those countries, with people holding cutlasses over their head and saying you have to behead people who insult the Prophet. So he went, he spoke no French, very little English, bought a big knife, whatever would look like a cutlass more, searched the internet to find the address of Charlie Hebdo. He found an old address, went there and tried to kill two people who had nothing to do with that. He was arrested, full of blood, in a few minutes afterwards. And his father then went on TV in Pakistan saying he was so proud of his son, he would give his 5 other sons, if needed, to avenge the Prophet. Now, when this happened, then you had this a very hysterical atmosphere. And a few days later, the father of the Muslim father of a pupil in a French school put online a message in his Twitter account or Facebook wall or both, saying that he objected to the fact that the teacher would show one of the cartoons to be discussed in a class about freedom of speech and blasphemy. And he vilified the teacher, saying he was a scoundrel, he should be ousted of the school, and so on and so forth. And the guy was friends with a huge amount of Islamists and radicals in France through his Twitter account. So it went viral. It was forwarded many times and shared many times. And this was seen, so then you have another atmosphere that is created. And this was seen by this Chechen guy, the son of the political refugee, living out of public money, who had radicalized already, who was part and parcel of the Chechen radical movement, who was looking to avenge the prophets, and then was in contact with the father. We don't know exactly how it went. Singled out the teacher, came to the school, bribed 2 of the pupils with 300 euros so that they would tell him who he was, and then slit his throat and beheaded him at lightning speed, as if he had been trained for beheading people, because this is not something you do easily if you're not trained. But this is part and parcel of the rite of passage in the Caucasus tradition of beheading sheep in particular for food. And then he posted the image of the severed head on the pavement on his Facebook account, made a call in Russian to a Chechen fighting in Idlib, and then was killed by the French police. So this was, of course, another huge trauma, because this was the killing of a teacher by a radical Islamist in front of his school, and interference by Islamists in the school curriculum. So this led to a huge level of solidarity, and conversely, an even more huge mobilization against Islamophobic France, because they had let this teacher show the cartoons and so on and so forth. Then finally, we had the Tunisian attack on the 29th of October in Nice. The guy had just crossed over illegally from Italy into France. He was not very bright from what we know, because his family was interviewed on local television and the like. I listened to that. They had a very rudimentary Tunisian dialect. They didn't really know who he was. Well, the guy spoke no French. And he came to Nice, and on the morning of the 29th, the Mouloud, or the Eid al-Mawlid, the festival for the celebration of the birth of Prophet Muhammad, he went into a church in Nice and stabbed 3 people to death. He's been wounded. He's now under police custody, but still unable to be interrogated, as far as I know. So, and this was also an issue of atmosphere. We don't know really whether the guy went on a boat from Tunisia to France because he had already planned that, or whether this is something he was told by others when he was in confinement in Italy for COVID-19, or whether someone told him to do that and give him some money, promise some money in Nice. We don't know for the time being. But there again, it doesn't look like you have an organized network. Okay, so this is this sort of 4th generation issue. which is of course extremely difficult to deal with when you're a police person or a police apparatus, because the security apparatuses are used to, decipher messages, to go into organizations, and then you have no organization. You have just an atmosphere and a spark. And this is something this is an enormous challenge. And it's a challenge because this is something that will destroy the very fabric of society by bringing communities against each other. Now, what is important, and I maybe will leave that for the discussion, is to wonder whether what happened in Vienna followed the same model or was different, because the guy claimed, made allegiance to the ISIS caliph. I saw the video in good Arabic, whereas he was not an Arab at all. Then it was claimed by ISIS, praised in their weekly. I do not think this is much evidence that there is still a network. I would rather say that this was part and parcel of another atmosphere which is now created in Austria, particularly by the Turks, and that Erdogan, after the re-Islamization of Hagia Sophia and the like, is so adamant on hostility against the West that a number of people who are particularly exalted and excited have taken this issue of jihad into their own hands. But I would like to stop here because these are just, ideas in the making, and I would be glad to have you challenge them or discuss them and debate them. And I would like to apologize for being a little long, but it was maybe out of enthusiasm for addressing my former compatriots, and so I'm at your disposal now to. Of course, after I listen to my colleague, which I see right in front of me with a map, to have whatever Q&A you want. Okay, so thank you very much, and dear Marek, forgive me for being a little long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for introducing us part of your new book, your hypothesis of jihadism of atmosphere, which I hope we are going to discuss further when we have questions from the audience. And now, Marek, please, to your contribution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for invitation, and it's a great honor and pleasure to be here with Mr. Professor Keppel. I hope you hear me. I'm apologizing for some technical problems in the beginning. I hope it's solved. I will be just very brief, and I will tell you some few words about the perception of Islam and Islamism in Czech Republic. I will try just to briefly summarize the Czech view of Islam in general, because I see there are also some foreign people who are maybe not so familiar with the Czech situation of the Czech Muslims and Czech Islam, and then move briefly to the Czech reflections of Islamism. Okay, so just very briefly about the history, that the current Czech approach to Islam is related to the fact that there is historically a very small experience of Czech people with Islam and with Muslim communities, and this is due to various reasons. And there are two main, in my opinion. The first is absence of colonial history, as many Western European countries have, and usually the colonies, there were also some territories inhabited by Muslims, and of course, naturally, there were some post-colonial contacts and many inhabitants from former colonies living on the territory. And also historically, there was no direct influence of the Ottoman Empire in Czech territory, which is also different, for example, from the South Slavic countries. So the Czech attitude towards Islam is traditionally very influenced by the Orientalistic attitudes, which was beginning in the past with a very strong romanticization, which could be visible, for example, in some examples of 19th century Czech architecture, for example, the very famous minaret in Lednice Castle, or some Moorish style Jewish synagogues in Prague. But today, the Czech view of Islam is strongly connected with a generalization of Islam as a violent religion, and at least also with deep prejudices. On the other hand, we have a very deep tradition of research in the field of Islam, which started with Alois Musil in the time of Austro-Hungarian Empire. And also when the independent Czechoslovakia was established, in year 1922, the Oriental Institute was established with the support of President Masaryk. And also the study of Islamic world didn't end it in time of communist Czechoslovakia, but because the Soviet Union was interested in some of the Islamic or Arab Islamic states, and they were in the sphere of interest. So also these relations with some selected Muslim countries were officially supported during the communist regime. After the change of regime in Czechoslovakia in 1999, several mosques and prayer houses were established in the Czech Republic, but they generally faced problems such as a ban of the construction of minarets and growing public distrust, which was probably due to growing Islamic violence or radical Islamic violence in 90s and around September the 11th. The most critical in this field was year 2015, when Czech Islamophobes briefly joined forces with the most important politicians, such as current President Miloš Zeman, and also some more liberal part of the Czech political scene, some Christian Democrats or some politicians from right wing. They also began to play a little bit on the Islamophobic note. In this aspect, I want to tell that the term Islamophobia, I also consider it to be a bit controversial, but I mean it in context. How I understand it in Czech environment, where it's characterized by very vulgar and demagogic discussion about Islam. And I'm also distinguishing the Islamophobia from non-demagogic critics of Islam in the Czech Republic, and we can also find some Arabists or diplomats who are very critical, but not Islamophobic, of course. Nowadays, the Czech media debate on Islam is still very biased, although anti-Islamic sentiments have been overshadowed by some other issues, like of course is COVID, or for example now there is a widespread criticism of current Czech Prime Minister or Czech government. As far as Islamism is concerned, the public debate in Czech Republic is usually even more distorted, as even the main media are not distinguishing various streams of Islamism, and this term is almost always described as a radical manifestation of Islam. Even among the so-called scientific publication on Islamism distributed by major bookstore chains in Czech Republic, there are many misleading publication by Czech and foreign authors, for example, by American Bill Warner or some similar authors. Relatively few Czech experts deal with the issue of Islamism. Usually they are from the various Czech universities or think tanks, or they are from the mentioned Oriental Institute, or they are journalists. At the same time, however, more and more translation of inspiring publication from English and French language are published, such as the books from Professor Keppel. I personally see the French discussion of the Middle East, Islam and Islamism as the probably most formative for the Czech professional discussion. And in this context, in the Czech scientific discussion on Islamism, I would like to draw attention to the books of the Africanist and Islamologist Mr. Luboš Kropáček and his book Islam and the West, and political scientist Pavel Barsha, who wrote the book The West and the Islamism, which were published around September 11th and helped to shape the Czech professional debate more in the spirit of the above mentioned French debate. Since then, a number of valuable domestic texts have been published, such as on topics of Salafism, the Iranian political system, and the Daesh. Very valuable are also the reflections of the Czech view of Islam and Islamism by Bronislav Ostřanský. And now let's just very briefly move to the Islamism and its perception in Czech Republic. Of course, there is a very small Muslim community, and also this is one of the reasons why there is a quite naturally no relevant attempt to articulate Islamic or Muslim political goals within Czech politics. But as the radical forms of Islamism are concerned, there have been several isolated attempts in recent years. For example, about 2 young converts appeared. One was Czech, the second was Slovak origin, and one of them allegedly planned to join Daesh, and the other was preparing a lone wolf-style terrorist attack in the Czech Republic. But probably the most serious case concerns the former Imam Samer Shehada, a controversial figure from Prague Muslim community, who established contacts with the radical Islamist organization An-Nusra. He himself was detained in the year 2018 in Jordan, from where he was extradited to the Czech Republic. He subsequently received a long prison sentence in Czech Republic, and also his brother and sister-in-law actually went to Syria under his influence, and they were convicted in absentia. There have also been reports of several other Czechs or persons naturalized in the Czech Republic fighting in the Syrian conflict on the side of the radical Islamists. There was also a case of elderly man of Iraqi nationality living in the Czech Republic who was supporting his son with money, and his son joined Daesh and received some money from his father, and finally this old man received some suspended sentence. In connection with radical Islamism, there was also one very bizarre terrorist attempt in the Czech Republic when a Czech pensioner, a supporter of the radical right-wing party, SPD, with a sharply anti-Islamic program, tried to fake a terrorist attack on a passenger trains. In 2 cases, he cut trees on the track, near which he placed the faked Arabic texts, which were supposed to give the impression that the author of the attacks was radical Islamist. The trains crashed into the trees, but there were no serious injuries. The mentioned pensioner was sentenced to 4 years and was ordered to receive psychiatric treatment. And last but not least, what I want to mention is a very medialized Czech discussion and debate about the Kurds and about the Turkey. And especially the Rojava issue is in particular a major activist topic in the Czech Republic. And this is partly due to the Czech progressive left and including several Czech IPG volunteers, which two of them were imprisoned in Turkey for a very long time, and also some journalists are very interested and very activist in this topic. And on contrast, the Turkey and especially President Erdogan are portrayed as some kind of archetypal Islamists. And this would be also the end of my speech. And here I just would. If I can, I would ask the professor how he is seeing now the Erdogan activities, if it's really possible them to be seen as to be really like more and more Islamist, or if it's still like some kind of blend between some building a cult of personality, some neo-Ottomanism, some aspects of Turkish nationalism with some populistic Islamist moves towards the conservative parts of the Turkish society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your very interesting remarks on the state of Czech, the field of studies on the Muslim world, or Orientalism, if you like, in the Czech Republic. And as I mentioned earlier on, if you whenever I'm around, if I can be back, I'm at your disposal. If you want to do things live with me, it will be a pleasure.
Very much.
If you have some students who, or MA or PhD students who, it would be better, of course, if they knew French. We are ready to train some of them, and I'm also a professor at Sciences Po, the Political Science Institute, where I was a tenured professor, but I left for École Normale Supérieure now. And we have a BA campus in Menton in the south of France. It's a beautiful location, which is my other identity, actually, from my mother's side, which is not Czech, and which I created in 2005. Then the classes are in English and French. I already have one Czech student there. And so you can get in touch with me, and we would be glad to help you train and make contact. And we have a sort of rather, how should I say, polyglot and cosmopolitan atmosphere there, not a jihadist atmosphere, but a cosmopolitan atmosphere. And I'll, of course, be at your disposal if I can do anything from my part of origin country. Now, as far as Erdogan is concerned, I believe, as you mentioned, that this is a blend for a politician who is in a struggle for political survival. Originally, Erdogan was perceived by many, even in the Turkish left, in the Turkish secular left, as, you know, a Democrat, someone who would be supported by many of my colleagues and friends in Turkey, because they looked at the military as the inheritors of Atatürk as secular fascists. And they would rather side with Erdogan and the AKP that looked closer to the sort of the new emergent generations of Turkey. At the time also, and even when the Arab Springs were in full bloom, many in the West, in Germany in particular, but also in Britain, less in France, and in America, including Barack Obama, considered that Muslim Brothers were the future of mankind in the Middle East. That it was, if you wish, the Islamic ethics and the spirit of capitalism, to paraphrase Max Weber, with the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. Then, after the Arab Springs turned winter or sour, and when Muslim Brothers were destroyed in Egypt, and when many of them fled to Turkey and other places, there was a sort of radicalization of the Muslim Brother discourse, a sort of Salafization of this discourse. And Erdogan had seized power with his own party, the AKP, and also with the help of another Muslim group called the Gülen Group. We had other names, but by the name of its main preacher, Fethullah Gülen, who's now who's been a political refugee in America for quite a long time. And in 2016, there was this coup attempt in July in Turkey, for which the blame was put on Gülen. It's something which is still, to say the least, unclear, but Erdogan shifted alliances. The Gülenists were very, very strong. It was like a sort of Islamic Freemasonry, if you want. It had permeated the state throughout, the judiciary, the military, particularly the Air Force, and the police and the university were arrested. They were savagely dealt with. You have more than 50,000 political prisoners in Turkey today. And then Erdogan compensated for that loss in his electoral base in making an alliance with the ultra-nationalists. a political party in Turkey called MHP, the National Action Party, Milli Hareket Partisi, which is named, among other things, for its paramilitary branch called the Grey Wolves. And so those guys are not only present in Turkey, but they're very much present in the European diaspora, particularly, of course, in Germany, in Austria, in all German-speaking countries, and also in the former Ottoman Empire countries such as Bosnia, Macedonia, like this Albanian guy in Albania, and the like. And so his view of Islam is a blend of hyper-Turkish nationalism and Islam. And to make my view clear, we can, take one incident that took place this summer, which was the re-Islamization of the Hagia Sophia Museum, formerly a mosque and originally a Byzantine church. In 1935, Ataturk, in order to demonstrate his commitment to secularism, or to be more precise, to the French understanding of secularism, which is laïcité, and in Turkish, in the Turkish language, laïc, which is the French word for secular, is laïc, L-A-I umlaut K. And most of the words for modern issues in Turkish are just French words which are spoken in Turkish, like autobus is called autobus, petit beurre, the little cake is called petit beurre with umlaut, and there is much of the, say, one fourth probably of the modern Turkish vocabulary is just French into Turkish, right? And so, and this came with the secularization, the modernization, getting rid of superstitions and the like, because Ataturk believed that the Islamic superstitions were the reason for the Ottoman decay. And so after the Treaty of Sèvres, after the Ottoman defeat after World War I, then the imperialist European countries carved Anatolia into pieces. And Ataturk had this big gathered old Turks, or many Turks, under his aegis, and then forced the Europeans out. And then you had the Treaty of Lausanne on the 24th of July, 1923, which erased the Sèvres Treaty, and which allowed for the territorial Turkish Republic, which is more or less what it is today. Now, Erdogan re-Islamized Hagia Sophia on the 24th of July, on this 97th anniversary of the Lausanne Treaty, putting his feet on the footsteps of Ataturk as a military man, as a strong man who, as a nationalist. But in so doing, he sort of eradicated Ataturk's secular heritage and legacy. And this was something that he did together with attacks on the Greeks, attacks on the Cypriots, because the Turks think that there is gas, probably far less than there is actually, in the Eastern Mediterranean, that they want to dispute to Cyprus, to Israel, to Egypt. They are not really interested in a gas pipeline under the sea there that could compete with the South Stream pipeline that goes under the Black Sea from Syria to Turkey and then to Western Europe. So this, of course, raised a number of tensions. Also, Erdogan, excuse me, is into an alliance with because of the strength of the Muslim brothers in the country, and he himself is a Muslim brother by persuasion, with Qatar, that has the money, and with Iran. After the end of the Turkish civil war, where they were on opposite sides, as I mentioned earlier on, and they want to build a strong pro-Muslim brother movement, which competes with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the Emirates, and the like. And this leads them to have a rather strong policy towards Europe, using Turkish communities in Europe politically, on a blend of religion and nationalism. For instance, 2 weeks ago in France, when the attacks intensified in Upper Karabakh or Nagorno-Karabakh against Azeris against Armenians, there were demonstrations by Armenians, because we have many survivors or children of survivors of the Armenian genocide in France, against that, but they were attacked by grey wolves, by Turkish extremists in France, who went to the cities where they live and tried to reenact pogroms, if you want, which led to the disbanding of the grey wolves by the French Council of Ministers last week, and 2 weeks ago. And this is part and parcel of the tension which is being used at the bequest of Mr. Erdogan, which was focalized on personal attacks on Macron. And also the fact that Erdogan sort of fanned the embers of the cartoons problems in order to maximize his status of a hero and a herald of Muslims worldwide, more or less like Khomeini did after 1989, after February 1989, which sort of polarizes the position in the Muslim world. The Emirates went to the rescue of the French, saying that this was a Turkish manipulation and the like. But anyway, it's a big issue now. Now, while Erdogan is doing that, while he's sending Syrian rebels under Turkish uniform to Libya, or now to Azerbaijan, paid for probably by Qatar, this is a major issue. In the meanwhile, the Turkish economy is becoming sluggish. The Turkish lira has lost 1/3 of its value against the dollar and the euro. Inflation is enormous because of COVID-19 and others. The job situation is a catastrophe. So it is, Erdogan is also fighting outside to regain the popularity he's losing inside. So where will it end? I don't know. I believe that as long as it was an issue with the French, Mrs. Merkel was not interested, because she said, blame the victim, serves them well. The French are secularists. They have what they deserve. Now that there is the attack in Vienna, which is not in Austria, is not a secularist country. It's supposedly a Catholic country. And the guy, even though it was an atmosphere, this atmosphere is part and parcel of the German-speaking jihadists. This guy knew people in Germany, he knew people in German-speaking Switzerland, and therefore she is becoming extremely worried for German security issues. So we are looking for the next summit of the European Union, early December, to see whether or not there are going to be sanctions against Turkey. If such sanctions include the end of the customs agreement with Turkey, of course, this is going to be a major blow on the Turkish economy. We're not quite there yet, but tensions are mounting, and Erdogan's predecessor, former Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu, had this zero enemies policy. You know, he'd be friends to everybody so that they would buy Turkish products, because Turkey is a sort of little China of sorts, manufacturing empire. And now nowadays Turkey mostly has enemies. Has enemy to almost everyone, but not with everyone at the same time. They sort of antagonized America because they bought the Russian S-400s. Trump would say no problem. You know, Trump was, as you may have seen in the New York Times, while he was at the White House, made $2.6 million of net income coming from Turkey, which is, of course, a very strange thing. And I guess he will have to explain that after he's left presidency, if he ever does that, and not seek shelter in Russia or in Turkey, maybe. And so we cannot expect that from Biden, I believe, who was elected largely during his career in New England by Greek and Cypriot grocers and restaurant owners. So we have all those issues, which I believe will be a major challenge for the Erdogan regime in the very near future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. We have one question from the audience via chat from Mr. Tomáš Pojar. He's asking, who would you name as the main, let's say, source of inspiration or center of gravity for the fourth wave of Islamism, the newest one that you've been describing? Could it be, I mean, Turkey you covered extensively, could be Saudi Arabia and the new approach of Mohammed bin Salman? Could it be remnants of ISIS, or let's say ISIS 2.0? Can Persians be an inspiration? So that's a question from Tomáš Pojar. And I also have one question regarding that hypothesis of the new wave of jihadism of atmosphere. What to do against it? What policies could be introduced? Because as you said, it's extremely challenging. If this is going to be the new MO, it's extremely challenging for the law enforcement to deal with it. So should we resort to censorship? Should we resort to more control of, let's say, those social networking places like mosques, etc.? Thank you.
Thank you very much. In terms of inspiration, well, it depends, you know. If it's the atmosphere in itself, someone like Erdogan is playing a very important role to create an atmosphere of hostility towards the West. And even though he may not say, I am a jihadist myself, nevertheless, people who are inspired by him may be tempted to go further than what he does. And also the cartoons issues were a problem. But what is complicated is that these are ideas that are shared over the internet, which are liked, like for instance, by internet users. When I mentioned those, I mentioned two books, one by Zawahiri, Knights Under the Prophet's Banner, the other by Suri, The Call to Global Islamic Resistance. In the first phase already, there was a Palestinian guy by the name of Abdallah Azzam, who was the inspirational figure, who had written a book called Il-Haq bil-Qafila in Arabic, Join the Caravan of Jihad, of course. And nowadays, I do not think anyone reads book anymore. It's just a network of things which are liked, which are tweeted, retweeted, hashtags, and this is a much more subtle phenomenon to some extent, where you do not have major ideologues, you have influencers, if you want. And so this is an enormous challenge, particularly for someone like me who's not on Instagram, doesn't even know what Instagram is, and can hardly know how to tweet and is not on Facebook. You know? So it's an issue of your generation more than mine. But it's a very serious issue for law enforcement people. And you know, I'm old enough to have seen that in the previous phases, law enforcement had 5 to 10 years, was 5 to 10 years late for each new type of jihadism. I mean, this third generation ISIS thing was finally understood while it was almost exhausted. And this is how, when the law enforcement spend zillions of dollars to buy Palantir equipment to, you know, break the codes of Telegram and the like. Now I believe that the challenge is, maybe if my hypothesis is right, then the challenge will be real time. What does it mean in terms of consequences? Precisely, this is a big issue, a big philosophical issue, I believe, at the European level. And this is what President Macron, in a way, mentioned when he made his speech on the 2nd of October at Les Mureaux, a little city in the outskirts of Paris, where there was the police precinct where a policeman and his wife, who were later stabbed in the evening by a jihadist, stabbed to death by a jihadist called Laroussi Aballa, who had just been out of jail and who sentenced to death also a number of journalists and yours truly. When what he called Islamist separatism, something which was not really well understood outside France and which was caricatured as Islamophobia, but which takes into account the fact that you cannot wait for the new attack to take place like a sheep is awaiting for slaughter in the slaughterhouse, or the knife in the slaughterhouse. So but this is, of course, a big challenge, because does it mean that we have to restrict our liberties in order to have more security? To what extent can we do that? Or should we not move anything? And the debate has been extremely polarized by apologists of the Islamists on the one hand, and people who are dubious about them on the other. And this is where we are now. And one of the things I would like to do precisely is to raise the awareness of our European partners, and so that we have a significant debate at the intellectual and political level to try to analyze the challenge that we're facing, and without the lenses of ideology, but more with the lenses of critical thought. But this is a huge challenge among us. And I have to say, you know, I'm 65, I've done much in my life for all that. So it's for your generation to take up the challenge.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end. I would like to thank you very much, Professor Keppel. Marek, thank you very much for participating in this webinar. I would also like to thank for the audience, which exceeded my expectations. Actually, we had at some point over 30 people participating. So I hope you found the event interesting, and we are gonna meet up at one of the other webinars organized by the Prague Center for Middle East Relations. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and have a nice evening today.